Hey everybody, Steve Larson with Bayer Environmental Science. I am the nursery and greenhouse specialist for the southwestern United States for Bayer. And I'm coming to you live today from a place I haven't been to in 14 months, and that's a nursery. I'm here at one of the local nursery operations in southeast Texas, and they've allowed me to tape this little introduction here today. And let me tell you, it's a beautiful day here in southeast Texas, probably upper 70s, low 80s in temperature, beautiful blue, cloudless skies. And that is just an introduction to what they will probably be encountering over the next few months, and that is warm weather. And as that warm weather spills into the south and across the west, we begin to see mite populations increase and damage from mites. So I'm going to spend today talking a little bit about managing mites in nurseries and greenhouses, some of the things you need to know not only about mite species and the different types of mites and the damage they do, but also about the different miticides and how they operate. Not all of them are the same, so it's very helpful to know a little bit about how each one fits into a rotation strategy depending on which mite species you might be encountering. So hang on, we'll get into the presentation. At the end of the presentation, I'll come back and we'll close out here at the nursery. Hope all is well on your end. Look forward to getting this presentation to you, and more importantly, looking forward to getting to see you in person sooner than later, it looks like. Talk to you soon.
I've been doing this job for an awfully long time, over 40 years and still counting, and mites have always been a problem to control. I can't think of a pest that's had more different pest control products come and go over the years than mites. So why are mites such a problem? And why are they such a problem to control? First of all, mites are a fairly diverse group, and most of us know this, but I just want to reiterate that mites are technically arachnids, similar to spiders and ticks. Mature mites have 4 pairs of legs, whereas mature insects have 3 pair for the most part. But we often intermix them when we're talking about them, mites and insects. And that's because most of us in the pest control side of this industry are manufacturing insecticides and miticides, and we oftentimes have products, such as the case of a couple of our products, that control both mites and insects. So it's easy to see why they get intermixed in conversation. But economically important mites are categorized into 4 groups. Spider mites, which is the most common group, which would include things like 2-spotted mites as well as Lewis mites. Tarsinamid mites, which include broad and cyclamen mites. False mites, which is a smaller group, but can be important on a few species that include false and privet mites. And then finally, one of the most difficult mite groups to control, the eriophyid mites, which include eriophyid, rust, and blister mites. And we know eriophyid mites also because they're vectors for rose-rosette virus. One of the challenges with mites is the fact that because they're small, they're more difficult to identify. And you either need a very powerful hand lens or in some cases a microscope to actually see them and to identify them properly. So ID is really important. In the graphic, you see some pictures of different types of mites. I tried to bring one in from each group that we just talked about. So I've got a two-spotted mite there on the left, broad and eriophyid mite there in the center pictures, upper and lower, and then on the right, a privet mite. But one of the things that's probably most notable about mites is the damage that they cause. You can see with the leaf on the lower left graphic here, the stippling that occurs, and this stippling actually occurs from the bottom side of the leaf, where the mite is actually removing the contents of plant cells and obviously kills those cells, turns those cells a whitish, yellowish color, and has that appearance from the upper surface. In extreme infestations, you can actually get webbing form up. There in the lower right hand, you see a pepper that had a mite that was down infecting the leaf axil, so the newly emerged leaves were deformed as a result of the damage. And the upper right picture is actually damage from the vectored virus from an eriophyid mite, rose-rosette disease. And so you get all kinds of strange responses from the plant as a result of that virus. So sometimes you can identify your mites just based on the damage, and it can be quite varied, but understanding which type of mite you have, whether it's by a physical ID or by recognizing the specific symptoms of the mite that's infecting your crop, that'll go a long way towards helping you to create a management plan that's effective. Just a couple of comments before we move to the next topic. Mites are found on almost all ornamental plant species, a very wide range of hosts, which makes it very difficult. And secondly, mites can move on wind currents. That makes it a bit of a challenge. They don't fly, obviously, they don't have wings, but they use a technique called ballooning where they actually manufacture a little bit of silk that can be caught up in the wind and can move mites on wind currents. Managing mites takes knowledge and effort. And the first thing you need to do is develop an effective management and control strategy that requires vigilance. Mites love warm, dry weather, and their populations will begin to grow very quickly as the temperature warms up. And that's one of the reasons that mites develop resistance to chemical controls. In the past, I don't think we've utilized very good resistance management strategies whereby we're rotating chemistries properly, and that's why I've seen literally dozens of miticides come and go over the years. Control products vary in life cycle and mite type efficacy, and you need to choose accordingly. What I mean by that is some miticides are good at controlling the younger life cycle individuals like the nymphs, whereas others are better controlling the adults or perhaps some even the eggs, and it's important that you know those differences. And not all miticides control all 4 groups of mites, and some of them are better on certain types of mites than others. I would suggest that you try to employ a biological control process in your mite management strategy. Now, one of the things that biological controls will do is help keep populations in check, but one thing that they won't do is control an existing runaway infestation of mites. And so if you have a really exploding population of mites, you probably need to steer clear of biological controls until you get that population under control. Another thing you need to employ is timely scouting, because scouting will help you to identify hot spots. And that's important in the process, because if we can limit our chemical treatments to just where we see the mites developing those hot spots, it'll probably limit the amount that you have to spray overall. One of the techniques I've used in the past myself, and I see that is still utilized in nurseries, is getting a clipboard, putting on a clean white piece of paper, holding it underneath foliage and shaking that foliage vigorously or patting it vigorously so that you knock mites down. And you can easily see them walking around on the white paper. And so that would be the first step in identifying whether or not mites are present. And then you can perhaps pull out your hand lens or go to a microscope to see which particular mites you have. So scouting is really important, and that just takes legs and eyes. You got to get out and walk around and look around in order to begin that process. When it comes to chemical rotation strategies, here's a couple of things to keep in mind. Focus on susceptible crops that are currently growing in conditions that are favorable to mites. So if you got a susceptible crop, the environment's starting to warm up, maybe it's a little on the dry side, you can usually expect mites to begin to infest that crop. So let's keep an eye on those. You also need to select products with uniquely different modes of action. So those are different miticides with different numerical group numbers that are reflective of their particular IRAC designation. IRAC, I-R-A-C, stands for the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee. Be cognizant of each product's performance strengths, whether it's speed of control or the spectrum of control, whether it's systemic, whether it's translaminar, life cycle stages that it's best controlling. Build your rotation around product strengths, and again, those differing modes of action. I recommend rotations that utilize at least 3, possibly 4 proven products. And one of the products I like to see in the rotation, when it's possible, is a high-quality horticultural oil. Since hort oils utilize suffocation as their method of killing mites, they're great for breaking any resistant populations that might be developing in your operation. So when it's possible, try to include a hort oil in your rotation. I wanted to slip this graphic in for you to see how a spider mite life cycle might take place during warm weather. And if you start counting the days there, you'll find that under ideal conditions, and this can be temperatures that are up in the 85-degree Fahrenheit range, a spider mite can complete its life cycle in just a matter of 7 days. And those females will live up to 4 weeks, and they can lay up to 500 eggs in a lifetime. So you start doing the math and you can see how exponentially explosive a population of mites can be during warm weather. And keep in mind that you're going to have all of those different life stages, different nymphs, eggs, adults, present at any one time. And that's why your chemical strategy needs to include miticides that will ultimately control all those different life cycle stages through the course of treatment. Let's wrap up today's discussion with some information about our 2 miticides, Savat and Cantos. Savat is really our go-to miticide. Even though it does have activity on whiteflies, we tend to lead with this product when it comes to mites and mite control. It does control all 4 major mite groups. It has outstanding translaminar activity. It controls all the feeding stages, nymphal and adult stages. It has a residual activity that can last up to 28 days, and it's found in its own unique group, IRAC group 23. This is a really, really effective product for mites, and I hope that if you haven't used it before, this is a product that you should consider as a real go-to, especially if you have a population of mites that's getting away from you. Our other miticide is a product called Cantos, and a lot of you are familiar with Cantos because it has systemic activity on both mites and a wide range of piercing, sucking insects as well. It does control spider mites, broad mites, and eriophyid mites, and so it has fairly good mite activity. But one of the features of Cantos is the fact that it's highly systemic. You can spray it on the shoots and it'll move downward in the plant, or you can apply it to the roots as a drench and it'll move upward and protect the shoots. But I would like for you to consider Cantos more for preventative mite control. If you have an infestation that's really growing, Savat should be your product of choice. But Cantos, especially if you're using it for other insect pests, can provide very good mite control as well. So I don't want to ignore it as a potential miticide in your portfolio of products to control mites. It does have good long-lasting and, as I mentioned, systemic activity. But another thing to consider is that it is also in that IRAC group 23. So we don't want to get into a program that has Savat that is followed by Cantos or vice versa. That would not be a good management of products from a resistance management standpoint.
Well, as you can see in our presentation today, mites are not the simplest of all of our predatory pests that we get to control. There's a lot of nuances. You really have to understand what type of mite you're dealing with. So ID is really key, really important. I hope you got a few tricks of the trade on how to do that in today's presentation. And then understanding miticides and which life stage they control effectively and how that might fit into a control strategy or a rotation strategy with your miticides. Again, not as easy as it might seem, but hopefully today's presentation helped out with a little of that. Really have enjoyed coming to you today, from a nursery. This is what I do for a living. I've been doing it for over 40 years and I miss being out in the nursery. So I look forward to seeing you soon. I'll leave my information up on the screen here at the end, so you can contact me either by phone, by email, you can text me, send a smoke signal, stop by my house, whatever it takes. I look forward to seeing you hopefully sooner than later. Be good, have a great spring, see ya.